everybody, this is Jonathan Miller here with the Hometown Historian channel again. We are back in Covenant Greenwood Cemetery here in Ebenezer, Pennsylvania. I promised I said we wanted to come back here because I had seen when I was searching through the records on Find a Grave that the Light family is buried here. And we had talked about them earlier, Light's Fort. One of the cool things about it is before Lebanon was settled, it was just Native Americans were here, but nobody else was. And as it got settled, there were two families that settled primarily at the very get-go. They were the Light family, who settled sort of in the north, and that's the son, the John Light, made Light's Fort, which we've been at. And then the Stites family were sort of more in the western part of. We had gone to the Chestnut Street Log Home and also Tabor Reformed Church, Salem Evangelical Lutheran Church, or the old Salem Lutheran Church. That's that area where the Stites family had settled in, and he eventually became the founder of what would become Lebanon. It was called Stites Town at first, but those were the two main families, and they sort of settled along creeks, and that's sort of how they started Lebanon. Now, I'll talk about later, get a little more information when they settled, the exact dates. And also, like, the Light family was interesting because there's actually two small family plots where they were buried. What is now inside Lebanon, I think in the 8th Street region, Lehman Street, and I'll get the exact locations and talk about who's buried at each of those places. But they had sort of like the thing to do was when you had cemeteries weren't away, they sort of plowed over them. Maybe they reinterred people, maybe they didn't. Some of them, exactly who was reinterred where, like the Grubbs, Curtis Grubb and his son and their wives were reinterred over at Hebron Moravian Cemetery. Sometimes there's a lot of confusion because of how long ago it was done. You just really don't know where they were reinterred, or even if they were reinterred. Maybe the stones were moved but not the bodies. You had, like in Annville, the Jerusalem cemetery that was sort of plowed over back in the 50s. Then they started to put together laws that you couldn't just do that. Now you can still, if the situation warrants it, like it's an absolute necessity and the family signs off on it, permits are signed and all that kind of stuff, it can still happen, but it's rare, much rarer that people will do that, because it's just, people are a lot more cognizant of that, the importance of these cemeteries, and that they shouldn't just be plowed over. It does happen, unfortunately, but that's more like the rural family farm plots, that type of stuff that would happen. The stuff that's in town, that type of stuff, they usually try to preserve that in some way. Well, the two ones that the Lights were buried at, they got plowed over. Now, from what I had read to this point, there's a lot of confusion about whether they had been reinterred or not. Well, when I came here to Covenant Greenwood, when I was looking, I found the dates match, the names match of those individuals, of the John Light and his wife. Now, I'm at a section of the Covenant Greenwood, I'm going to turn the camera around here in a second, where I found pretty old stones and the dates that start to match. And I found two stones in particular that I'm pretty sure are probably John Light and his wife. Not quite sure if it is. And then there's another one down a little further where it says Light, and there's some older stones. But I found another area of the cemetery down a little bit further this way where there was a Light buried in that time period, but we're going to assume this is the area where they're buried. It may not be, but it just depends on when they were actually reinterred, where they would have been put. They might have been, one group from the one cemetery is put one place and one group was put another place. I'm really not sure, but we will talk a little more in depth about them and their importance, because really Lebanon itself would not exist most likely without these individuals. And how they had to live is pretty harsh. So these settlers, these early pioneers, really were so important to the life that we live now today. So I'm going to flip this around. We're going to check these stones out of the Light family. There's a nice little section here. Whether these are John Light. We'll look at the stones a little closer. Maybe we can interpret it because a lot of them are in German. But so let's flip this around. And here we are at the first stones here. Here you have a John W. Light. Now he died in 1850. The John Light that built the Lights Fort would have died, I think it was in the 1770s, 1780s, in that general range, because he was born, him and his wife, I think, were both born in like the 1720s, 1730s. There's a Martin Light. That one looks like it might be in the 1700s, the Barbara Light. And see, they have the different spellings here as well, as one of the things we look for. It's L-I-C-H-T, and then there's where they had switched it to the English version of it, L-I-G-H-T. So you can tell the older ones here are the L-I-C-H-T is what they were originally spelled as. But these two right there, we're going to look at a little closer. Those ones, I think those are the stones, because that would be that's what they would have looked like in that time period. They would have had, a lot of them had the red like sandstone. The Joseph Light, that one's really messed up. And that's the newer stone. And here's the Licht, the L-I-C-H-T, the older one. And that, I'm trying to see the date there. But at least the birth is in 17, it looks like almost 1790, and then the death was 1823. There's another light, Solomon Light. That was 1894, but there's a Samuel Light. So here's the Barbara Light. Yeah, and this is 1730, and then she actually almost looks like 1813. And then this is him, Heinrich Light. He was a John Heinrich Light, I believe. Yes, I think this might be it here. I just want to see he's a Revolutionary War vet. I believe that's for that, because he is, I believe, like French and Indian War as well. So maybe this could even be his son. But we're gonna go. There's a one down there that says Light, and I think there's some older stones down there, sort of the Revolutionary War period. But I believe these are the John and the Barbara Light, the John Heinrich Light. It says higher. But that's pretty neat if that's their actual stones. Whether they're actually buried here or not, I don't know, because there's thought that they were reinterred, and then there's thought that they're not, because depending on when it happened, records are lost. People really don't know for sure. I know I had seen other parts of the cemetery too that had some of these much older stones that are probably like early 1800s to middle 1800s. So I saw the Light there. Obviously much newer, but I thought I saw some older stones there as well. But I'm pretty sure that is their pretty sure that's the burial site for that, at least the one cemetery. So like I said, the one's a little older, because I believe, if I remember correctly, it was the John Heinrich or Heinrich Light's parents, and maybe like a brother or sibling or something like that was buried there as well. And then the other one was where he was buried. His wife was buried. I think some of their children. Wasn't many at each of them. They might have only had 8 to 10 people were buried in those particular cemeteries. I believe there's a Zeller, a couple Zellers there, but yeah. So that's pretty neat. One of the, in essence, the first settlers of Lebanon area. So. But anyways, with that, we're going to go into another section here of the video that'll go into those two different cemeteries, where they were, still are technically, who was buried there, maybe just a little bit more information on those first settlers, the Light families. All right, thanks everybody. So I think I might have actually found it. It's over a little bit further. We were just over there, And then I noticed a few more. This one says actually Johannes. Now it's broken off light, but like the date of 1720 was birth date, and I can't make out like the death date, but that's another one of those red sandstones, because those probably were like a sibling or something. But there's another Johann Light here, and that one's much easier to read. But once again, it's like, and there it looks like that would have been an original red sandstone, because that's probably where his wife's stone was. And they break down, and sandstone, the red sandstone, is just a more brittle rock, but falls apart over time, unfortunately. You can't really read that. But this might be from the one cemetery, and the one over there is probably from the other cemetery, because I think the one with the Johannes Light, there were only like 4 burials. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5, and the other one's the one that had a bit more. But I'll have more information later in the video about that as we look a little deeper into that. But it is sort of cool. That stone, it matches the dates. And these are probably a number of these. Some of these larger cemeteries, you'll see these small, like sort of niches within this cemetery of much older stones that are smaller. There's like 5 or 6 of them there together, and those are probably, I would assume, from small family plots that, whether they're in the city itself or whatever it might be, and they basically get reinterred in a cemetery like this that's much larger. And see, here's a Jacob Light, Private Revolutionary War, 1782, lived 1758 to 1837. That's probably one of his children. There's another one of those sandstones, so this is probably another section. Some of those that got brought over, and just the stones they are what they are. Let's see if there's anything on the other side. Yeah, they're on this side. There's a Samuel Light, L-I-C-H-T. That looks like Elizabeth. And then, not quite sure what that is. But once again, it's just one of those things where they are exactly in the cemetery. I think I found them. I obviously found areas of the Light family that were from that time period in the 1700s into the early 1800s, and they were so important to the city of Lebanon and to the country as well. So, but yeah, it's very, very interesting. So as promised, I did quite a bit of more research on the Light family. So Johannes Peter Light, and he had the original spelling of L-E-I-C-H-T, which eventually went to L-I-C-H-T, which eventually went to L-I-G-H-T, as it's known today. He was born in 1682 and passed away in 1759. I've also seen 1758, but whichever one it is. In 1719, he left the German Palatinate, and he made stops in England and Baltimore, Maryland, before eventually settling in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. In 1738, he actually purchased the land. I think it was like 237 acres from Caspar Wister, which we've ran into him with Isaac Meyer, with the Meyer homestead, and also with Tulpehocken Church. He was a pretty important guy in Philadelphia who was smart and invested in land, and so he comes up in a lot of our stories, the White Rose and things like that. But in 1742 is when Light's Fort was built, and that was sort of, I think it was originally meant to be more of a meeting house for Mennonites, but eventually turned in, with the French and Indian War, turned into a fort for a sanctuary for the citizens of the local area. So he really was like that northern part of Lebanon that was the Lights, and there's actually several cemeteries. There's actually another one behind the Lebanon Valley Mall on the other side of the railroad tracks, I believe was a son of his, Samuel Light Cemetery.
and there's two of these smaller Light cemeteries, and it's the Licht cemeteries. The first one is actually on Light Avenue and Monument Park, but it's literally in the middle of that street, like right in the intersection almost. It eventually became the Salem United Brethren Church Cemetery, but they were reinterred. I couldn't find a date for when they were reinterred, but from what is known, I've seen various different statements. Johannes Light and his wife Maria Kreider Light are supposedly still buried there, that they were not moved because that was their cemetery. That one stone could have possibly been in the later part of this video. Some of those earlier ones, the one that said Henrik Light, that was his son. It was John Henrik Light. There was a Jacob Light, we saw his. Henry Light, that we saw his. There was a number of them there, so most of them, I think that was the larger of the two Light cemeteries. That one's the one that had the majority of his children. There were, I had it wrong, his parents are over in Germany, I would guess. So I don't know. I had read that somewhere, but the information was wrong. The second Light cemetery, that one is located basically right in the middle of the street, in the Lehman Street and North 3rd Street intersection. So that one no longer is no longer around anymore. That one was the cemetery of Martin Light, who lived from 1726 to 1805, and Anna Pfeiffer Light from 1730 to 1783. This was eventually handed over to his son John when Martin Light passed away, and Martin Light was a son of Johannes Henrik Light, or Johannes Peter Light. I'm sorry. But that's the information I have. I've heard varying reports whether these two couples were actually buried and still buried at the cemeteries they originally buried in, or they were actually moved to Covenant Greenwood Cemetery. It's sort of up in the air one way or the other. Really don't know. Yeah, so this is a really intriguing family. It's a family that very, very important to the Lebanon area and the surrounding areas, as well as the kids from Johannes Peter Light and his wife Maria sort of went out all over the area then and were fruitful and multiplied. But it is interesting. I'd like to find out when, as they switched their names, the spellings and stuff like that, because I always find it interesting in cemeteries. Like, you'll see the older Germanic spelling of a name, and then in this particular case they had 3 different spellings, and they refer to him with the Leicht at times, and then with the Li. So it was probably, I'm guessing, sometime in his lifetime that maybe when they came over here, they switched over to the second spelling and eventually adopted the spelling of today. But yeah, it's a very intriguing story, interesting. And it is cool in Covenant Greenwood that I believe a lot of these small cemeteries, they would reinter, if they wound up being moved because of roads being made or houses being built or whatever the reason was. Cemeteries like Covenant Greenwood, that were our larger public cemeteries, they would that's where they would reinter a lot of these. That's why it's really interesting when you go into that cemetery. You'll see these little sections where they have the very much older looking stones in amongst, say, the newer. So there's sort of those individual plots. Now, how many? I had read somewhere that there had been the first Light cemetery with Johannes Peter Light, that was the much larger one. Obviously, it would be much larger if it then got adopted by a church. And then the other one was what remained a small family plot. But whether everyone had been reinterred or not, who knows. But that's the story of the Light family, and thanks for coming along on this journey and finding some more hometown history. And as always, we will see you about town.